So Nintendo's next remastered Zelda project has seemingly leaked following some new information that we have related to the very recent Giga Leak. I guess you could call it a Tera leak, because essentially a terabyte worth of data was unfortunately hacked from Game Freak's servers due to an employee that got compromised via some kind of phishing scheme. Long story short, we're learning all types of information about the Pokemon franchise. Definitely things that Game Freak was not ready to announce, and that is unfortunate for everybody involved, but I do have a video covering all of that in detail on the channel if you are interested. But one interesting piece of information that was tied to this latest Giga Leak from Game Freak was actually the confirmation that the Nintendo Switch 2's codename is indeed Ounce. And you might remember quite a while back we saw posts from accounts like Pioro, who just straight up would leak Nintendo Directs almost in their entirety. I mean, absolutely, if you can call anybody a tier 1 leaker, it was him, and we found out that his internal source was most likely a Nintendo employee, or maybe he was the Nintendo employee and he had access to the back end of Nintendo's websites when they were building new pages for unannounced games. Nintendo stopped doing that in their June Nintendo Direct, and that was whenever we kind of saw the downfall of Pioro unravel. But you can see a post way back when Pioro was still super active that says, "I knew the code name but never thought it could be related to Ounce or something, to be honest." Midori has made a great point here, and he was pointing out something that Midori was saying in reference to Ounce being the code name for Nintendo Switch 2, and we now know, due to the fact that Gen 10 is indeed for Pokemon being developed on Ounce or Switch 2. It may also have a Switch 1 version, but it definitely looks like Switch 2 is confirmed for that, and you would expect Gen 10 to launch on Nintendo's next-gen hardware. We now have to go back in history a little bit, because you might remember a period of time where Midori, another tier 1 leaker that had some interesting things with their whole internet persona unfold, and they kind of went missing from the internet for a while. They might or might not be back as Ryan from the Bronx currently, but Midori was somebody else who was providing a lot of internal information, such as code names for Nintendo Switch games that were yet to be announced, including some that do seem to tie to this Ounce code name that we now know to be the code name for Nintendo Switch 2. So that's where this gets really interesting. So we have to look at what code names have been proven right, that are now confirmed to be concrete, correct information, and now give that much more credence to the idea that this mystery code name tied to a Zelda Remaster project seems to for sure be a thing. And you have to keep in mind, until anything's officially announced, of course, games and plans can get canceled or changed at the last minute, and there's also the smallest possibility that this remaster is tied to something of a tech demo and not necessarily a finalized bring to market product. But if it is a finalized bring to market product, well, it's a very interesting choice for Nintendo to pick a 3D Legend of Zelda game that was historic for the franchise, but is actually pretty recent in terms of how long it's been since its original release. So we'll get on the same page with everything. Before we do, make sure you like, subscribe, and turn on your bell notification to join Sunbro Nation if you're new here. And I want to first kick it off by covering a couple code names that we had heard from Midori prior to Nintendo announcing said projects that we now know to be exactly tied to the games that we theorized that they would be. And the first one does have to do with the Legend of Zelda franchise, and that is codenamed Edward. Now, we had Link's Awakening with the codename Richard. There is a royal family where Edward and Richard are brothers, so there is kind of a link between the two, no pun intended. And of course, we know that Echoes of Wisdom has been confirmed to have the codename Edward internally, and it has that same chibi art style and game engine from Link's Awakening, which does lead into the idea that Nintendo tends to name certain projects that are tied to each other in terms of the same engine and art style, and maybe a sequel more or less, or at least maybe the same studio working on it, and picking these code names that have significance and are tied together. Now, we also saw the name Banquet floating around, which many theorized to be a Mario Party game because it was from ND Cube, and Buffet was actually the code name for Super Mario Party. So again, another correlation that you can go off of, where Nintendo names Super Mario Party Buffet internally, and then Banquet turns out to be the code name now confirmed for Super Mario Party Jamboree. So with that in mind, I want to highlight another thing that Nintendo does do with code names whenever they have some kind of port or remaster project or some form of a re-release in the works. As you can see from Oatmeal Dome, this post that outlines Mario Kart 8 Deluxe's codename, which says Nintendo's internal codename for Mario Kart 8 is Turbo. Deluxe's codename is Turbo-S. And you may or may not remember, around the time that we were learning about all of these internal codenames, we also had one appear online from Midori that was U-King-O, and that was at the time theorized to be a Breath of the Wild 4K version, or Breath of the Wild remastered in some way, shape, or form. You might also remember some reports from Gamescom 2023 that said that there was a behind closed doors presentation to developers on targeted spec PC hardware, so not Switch 2 dev kits or anything like that, or prototype units, but rather PCs targeting roughly what the Switch 2 will be capable of. And one game that they were shown was a 4K version of Breath of the Wild running with virtually no load times whatsoever. And you can see this post on Our Gaming Leaks and Rumors, which outlines this further, which is now 5 months old. And it says, according to Midori, Nintendo are working on a new project with the codename U-King-O, which may be related to the codename of the Switch 2. U-King was apparently the codename for Breath of the Wild. Given what Midori said about this codename having to do something with the Switch 2's codename, odds are whatever this is might either be an enhanced version of Breath of the Wild, possibly what was shown at Gamescom BTS, or another game set in the Breath of the Wild style. At the very least, the O part in the name seems to imply the Switch 2's codename probably starts with an O. So now that we have the confirmation that Ounce is indeed the codename for Nintendo Switch 2 internally, and we had U-King for the Breath of the Wild codename, it does indeed seem like U-King-O is some kind of 4K remastered version of Breath of the Wild. Now this question becomes, how does Nintendo handle remastering a game that is so recent in their release history? Because, well, March of 2017, yes, that is quite a while back now. It's still pretty uncharacteristic of Nintendo to go back less than 10 years to grab a Zelda game from the past and remaster it. And while this is absolutely becoming more of a trend in the gaming industry recently, most notably Sony picking games like The Last of Us Part 2 and remastering it, or more recently than that, Horizon Zero Dawn, if you can believe that's getting a remaster for the PS5. Like, they are definitely doing that with some of their bigger franchises to try to drive additional revenue. But the way they are handling it, because those are games that were recently out and you can still play via backwards compatibility on the PS5, and keep in mind, we're planning on seeing backwards compatibility for the Switch to the Switch 2. Well, Sony's marketing it as if you already own the game, you can just do a simple $10 upgrade to take advantage of all of the enhancements and not have to go repurchase it. And the big question is would Nintendo do something like that, or would they just release it as a $70 full price retail tag on the new console and not have any way to enhance the old game? And that would be a big misstep in my opinion, because it's going to deter a lot of people from going out and getting that game. As a hardcore Zelda fan, I would probably buy it just to have it. I also don't feel like Breath of the Wild needs that much of an enhancement right now, even though I would love to see it running in 4K with no load times, and I would absolutely play it again sometime in the near future if it is upgraded for Switch 2. I still don't feel like that's the title out of all the Zeldas that we could be picking from the past to bring forward with a modern day enhancement. So it is possible that this U-King-O is just tied to the tech demonstration that they created for those developers, but it's also possible because this has an internal code name and now these have all turned out to be true and tied to finalized retail game projects, that yeah, this could indeed be the next remastered Zelda that Nintendo has cooking. And that's where I really want to pose the question to you guys on how you'd feel about this, because it's a game that came out in 2017, and in theory, as long as we can expect backwards compatibility, we should be able to play it on the Switch 2 relatively easily. And would this be something like a launch game for the next gen Nintendo hardware? Because that's very possible. And then if we get Breath of the Wild remastered, where does that leave Tears of the Kingdom for that conversation? We don't have any codename leaks that suggest that that would be in the pipeline, but would they do the same thing for that towards the end of the Switch 2's generation, or just drop it randomly in the middle? And I don't know how I feel about getting Breath of the Wild 4K playable before games like Wind Waker and Twilight Princess on modern hardware that I'm very much hoping come out on the Switch or Switch 2 at some point in time, but we're not seeing any codenames tied to those necessarily internally, and we are seeing this U-King-O title that is now tied to Ounce, which we know to be the Switch 2 codename. So let me know in the comments down below how you'd feel about Breath of the Wild getting a 4K enhanced version for Nintendo Switch 2, and specifically I want to hear about how you think Nintendo would handle this for people who have that game, because 32+ million copies sold of it, so clearly a lot of the Switch install base has it. Do you think they throw it on the retail shelves as a $70 price point and that's the only way you can purchase the enhanced experience? Or do you think they pull a Sony card where yes, they're going to sell a $70 version for the new console, but people who already own the game, maybe you have to be a Nintendo Switch Online member or something, but you can hop into your eShop and buy the upgrade kind of like a DLC style add-on content for just something like a $10 or $15 price point? And would you be happy to see something like that and you might pick it up? Or do you think Nintendo needs to avoid remastering titles this recently in their catalog to begin with, especially if the original versions are playable via backwards compatibility for their next-gen hardware? So make sure you share all your thoughts and feelings in the comments down below before you leave, regardless if we agree or disagree. Also, make sure you like, subscribe, turn your notification bell. And with that, I've been Sunbro, you've been Nation. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.